Okay, so this is another short by Kate Chopin. Now, this is again a genre in literature that is similar to a short story. It's called a short because it's much shorter than your standard short story, well under 1,000 words, often under 600, 500 words. And so that is, again, this is an example of Kate Chopin's shorts. Now, Kate Chopin was born in the 1800s and she lived into the 1900s, and she wrote a couple of novels and short stories, a collection of short stories. And she is another author who really wasn't discovered until after she passed. Like Emily Dickinson. Emily Dickinson's poetry really wasn't recognized until after she had passed. Kate Chopin's work wasn't really recognized until after she passed, and it wasn't fully embraced because of how feminine it is. Kate Chopin liked to focus on the experiences of women dealing with living in this outside world of expectations, all the expectations that women experience, how to look, how to dress, how to behave, how to do all these things. And that's their exterior world, but then they have an interior world that is often, and that means their emotions, their insights, their thoughts, their secrets. And that interior world of women is often much different than what they show outwardly. And this was particularly true during this time because women were, like, for instance, women did not yet have the right to vote. So the lives of women were much more restricted. So that's what made her writing a bit more controversial, because she was daring to kind of talk about the inner thoughts and emotions and desires of these characters in her stories, whereas that's really hadn't been something that had been written about in American literature yet. So this is another short called An Idle Fellow by Kate Chopin. I am tired. At the end of these years, I am very tired. I have been studying in books and languages of the living and those we call dead. Early in the fresh morning I have studied in books, and throughout the day when the sun is shining, and at night when there were stars, I have lighted my oil lamp and studied in books. Now my brain is weary and I want rest. I shall sit here on the doorstep beside my friend Paul. He is an idle fellow with folded hands. He laughs when I upbraid him and bids me with emotion hold my peace. He is listening to the thrush's song that comes from the blur of yonder apple tree. He tells me the thrush is singing a complaint. She wants her mate that was with her last blossom time and builded a nest with her. She will have no other mate. She will call for him till she hears the notes of her beloved one's song coming swiftly toward her across forest and field. Paul is a strange fellow. He gazed idly at the billowy white cloud that rolls lazily over and over along the edge of the blue sky. He turns away from me, and in the words with which I would instruct him, to drink deep the scent of the clover field and the thick perfume from the rose hedge. We rise from the doorstep and walk together down the gentle slope of the hill, past the apple tree and the rose hedge, and along the border of the field where wheat is growing. We walk down to the foot of the gentle slope where women and men and children are living. Paul is a strange fellow. He looks into the faces of people who pass us by. He tells me that in their eyes he reads the story of their souls. He knows men and women and the little children and why they look this way or that way. He knows the reasons that turn them to and fro and cause them to go and come. I think I shall walk a space through the world with my friend Paul. He is very wise. He knows the language of God, which I have not learned. So here you have, kind of just an interesting little story about this woman who describes herself in the first paragraph. So you see in the first paragraph, she begins, "I am tired." And that's kind of an interesting way to begin a story. And she goes on to describe why she's tired. And so over the years, she's been studying in books the languages of the living and those we call dead. So early in the fresh morning, she studied the books, and throughout the day, when the sun is shining, she's studying these books, and then at night, when the stars are out, she lights a lamp and she studies in more books. And now she says her brain is very weary and she wants to rest. So she's really focusing on, in the first paragraph, that she has invested her time on gathering knowledge from books. So then, in a way, because she's tired, because this has made her weary, she sits on a doorstep with her friend Paul. Now, Paul, she considers an idle man because he sits, and obviously he is not spending his days studying from books or his nights studying from books, but he's doing something very different. So in the second paragraph, he is an idle fellow with folded hands. So if you can imagine them together, sitting on a doorstep, she's tired and Paul has folded hands, meaning that he's at rest and at peace. That's kind of the energy that he has, and that's how he presents himself. He laughs when I upbraid him. So upbraid means to criticize someone. So she may have come out and said, you're idle. She may even call him idle. He kind of doesn't really take her criticism very seriously, and he asks her with emotion to hold my peace, meaning quiet. Be quiet. Because what he's doing is he's listening to a thrush's song, to a bird close by who is singing, and basically he's saying that there is a female bird who is calling for her mate, the mate that she had last season, and she will continue to call for this mate until he returns her call and comes to find her again for another season. And so this is all something that he is listening to and, creating a story for. In the third paragraph, she goes on to say Paul is a strange fellow. So again, she considers him idle. She considers him a strange fellow. He gazed idly at a billowy cloud that rolls lazily over and over along the edge of the blue sky. He turns away from me and the words with which I would instruct him. So again, here in the paragraph above, she's upbraiding him, right? She's kind of criticizing him. And here she's trying to instruct him. But is he paying much attention? No, he's not. He just kind of turns away, and he drinks deep the scent of the clover field and the thick perfume of the rose hedge. So here notice how Paul is using all of his senses of observation, right? So he's listening to the thrush here, listening intently. Here he is watching intently the clouds that roll by and taking in and breathing in the scent of the clover field and the thick perfume of the rose hedge. So he is using all of his senses of observation to kind of take in his whole environment. We rise from the doorstep and walked together down the gentle slope of the hill, past the apple tree and the rose hedge, and along the border of the field where wheat is growing. We walked down to the foot of the gentle slope where women and men and children are living. So now they've gone from the doorstep to, and they walk down to where people are. And again, she makes the observation, just as she did in the third paragraph, where she says, Paul is a strange fellow. So she repeats this in the final paragraph. Now, she says this in the third paragraph because he is watching intently the billowy clouds and taking in the scent of the clover fields and the rose hedge. Here, she says he's a strange fellow because he looks into the faces who pass us by. He tells me that in their eyes he reads the story of their souls. He knows men and women and little children and why they look this way and that way. He knows the reasons that turn them to and fro, cause them to go and come. I think I shall walk a space through the world with my friend Paul. He is very wise. He knows the language of God, which I have not learned. So here you have two characters. One has studied a particular language and accumulated a particular knowledge. And then you have this other character, right? Well, that's the narrator. And then you have this other character, Paul, who the narrator says is an idle fellow. You know, he's not spending his days working hard and reading these books in study. He spends his days very, very differently from the narrator. So she calls him idle, she calls him strange, but in the end she has great respect for him because he has knowledge that she does not possess. In fact, her knowledge has made her weary, and his knowledge has made him wise. And she says, he knows the language of God, which I have not learned. So in what might look like idleness or strangeness, what has he done? He's fully taken in everything in the world, from the song of birds to the smell of flowers and fields to the way that the sky moves and clouds move. He's observed all of that and he's taken it in with all of his senses and has a deep appreciation for that. And when it comes to people, he is not afraid to gaze into their eyes and look intently at them and take them in and make the same kinds of observations of people that he does with nature. So that's what makes him wise. And so when she says he knows the language of God, meaning that he looks out on the world and all of God's creations and takes them in with all of his senses. And that's what makes Paul wise. And that is the difference between how Paul has wanted to accumulate his knowledge and how she has accumulated hers, how the narrator has accumulated hers. And there's quite a difference between the two.